Welcome to the Final Girls podcast, where we're not quite sure whether we're a sad girl film or a teen horror film. I'm Anna Bogutska, co-founder of the Final Girls Collective and your podcast host. If you're new to the show, welcome. We're finalizing our fourth series, all about teen horror currently. We've only got a couple episodes to go, and we've been exploring since September last year everything that makes up teen horror, really expanding the definition of the genre and exploring why teenagers, and especially teenage girls, make for some of the most compelling protagonists of the genre. In today's episode, we've got a new guest in acclaimed screenwriter Gemma Hurley joining me to discuss the 2017 Paco Plaza film Verónica, which is kind of a teen horror because it is about a teenage girl, and is also a possession horror because it's about a teenage girl being possessed by a demon. A quick reminder, if you are new to the show, we spoil everything pretty much from the very beginning, so keep that in mind. If you haven't seen Verónica yet, I do recommend it. It's available on Netflix in the UK, so do check it out. It's a fantastic little scary film. And a quick reminder as well, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Final Girls UK, and if you can spare a few seconds to leave us a positive review on Apple or Spotify podcasts, really appreciate that, and it really helps people discover the show. We also have a Patreon at patreon.com/The Final Girls, where we're publishing in-depth reviews of new films. The most recent one has been Alex Garland's Men, and we've got a couple new episodes banked as well for the Patreon, so if you want to support us, then do go there. And with all of that said, please enjoy our take on Verónica.
Watched it like 10 times. It's so silly. And that really kind of got me into the sort of horror can be fun, I guess. And then, later on, I loved again, like Cabin in the Woods, because it has this kind of like pastiche and this humor to horror, which I really like. In terms of more recently, my favorite teen horrors are probably things like It Follows, actually. And Verónica, when I first saw, which we're going to get talk to in a minute, when I first saw that, I thought it was the scariest freaking movie I'd seen in my life. I had to keep pressing pause, press the space bar every time that cupboard opened. I was like, no!
Oh my God. That's a perfect segue to get to talk about Verónica then.
It is. But the thing that I find is, and I'm sure we'll get into this in a bit, but the thing about, is Verónica teen horror? Is Verónica possession horror? Is it supernatural? I don't really see it as a teen horror, because when you say teen horror to me, I think people running around with knives and bare breasts and gore. That's, lots of Americans shrieking.
Yeah, like the slasher format.
Exactly.
I found it really interesting when I was putting this together, and I've kind of said it numerous times over the course of the season. They've sort of stretched wide the definition of teen horror, because I also always thought about it that way. It's just this particular moment in, it's the classic slashers, and then it's the slasher revivals, and it's, naked 27-year-olds posing as teenagers running around being stabbed. And then I thought of Verónica, where I'm like, that's actually like a character study of a teenage girl that also gets possessed. So it's a really scary horror movie that's all about a teenage girl. I'm like, how is that not teen horror?
This is true. And you could argue that it's still, all of those slasher teen horror movies tend to have some kind of moralism to it. Yeah. I don't think Verónica has moralism, but it's definitely got this sort of coming of age. She gets her period during the does the demon give her period? There's this sort of blood to do with sexuality or turning into an adult that definitely comes into it. So, you could argue I've always put this more in my head as this is like a supernatural possession movie and a tragedy more than anything, that kind of also happens to be a teen horror.
For sure. So let's dig into that throughout this episode. Before we kind of start really talking about Veronica, can you summarize the plot of the movie for me very briefly?
Okay, here we go. So Veronica is allegedly based on a true story that happened in Spain in around, I think it's 1991. Very famous in Spain because it's one of the few recordings of a police report which actually contains evidence or, observations of actual paranormal activity, which freaked the hell out of me. So the idea is it's about this girl called Veronica. Things have been changed from the real life story. Who essentially, she's a teenager. Her mum works during the night. She's a waitress, and Veronica is left to look after her younger siblings because her father died not too long ago. And she's just got the weight of the world on her shoulders, full of responsibility, desperate to just live a teenage life. Things take a turn when Veronica and her friends decide to do a seance during a eclipse. Veronica's trying to contact her dead father, but things go horribly wrong in the seance, and she brings something dark home with her that begins to haunt her. I don't know how spoilery we need to get in terms of what happens, but it doesn't turn out very well for her.
So let's dig into all of that. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, and I'd love for you to expand on that. Kind of, you mentioned that the first time you watched it, you got super scared. So what about the film really scared you on first watch? And did that change when you were watching it for this episode?
Absolutely. So when I first saw this, the movie, I heard about this because it came out on Netflix. I think it was 2017. And I'd heard all the stories like, oh, this is the scariest film ever made. And, all that kind of marketing bump, which is always quite fun. And I had just quit my job and had moved into a really spooky house in the north of England. I was trying to be a writer full time, and we lived in this 4-story house that was really cheap in Sheffield or something, and it used to be a GP surgery. And the way the house was designed was that you were always the stairway was in the middle of the house, so you were always going round a corner, and you never really knew what was on the other side of the corner. So you just kind of went in this spiral up the center of the house. And in that time, in the beast of the east, the coldest winter in the UK for a very long time, I decided to watch this film. And I just had to keep pressing spacebar. I was just like, it was the thing that really freaked me out personally was because she was just so alone and so no one is there for her. She's got the weight of the world on her shoulders. And those moments in the film, like for instance, when she's just in bed in the middle of the night and then her wardrobe just creaks open. You're like, Jesus Christ. Or something's reflected in the dark TV screen. I just couldn't handle it. It just made me feel like I was a kid again, just scared of the shadows of my room, and no adult was going to come and help me, in the way that no one came to help Veronica. But then when I rewatched it, when we were like, Anna, you're like, let's chat about Veronica. And I had to rewatch it a couple of nights ago. And I was like, why did this film scare me so much? Because I'm just kind of watching. Maybe it's because I no longer, I knew what was going to happen. So I had less of that suspense. But for some reason, it didn't hit for me in the same way. I just saw it more as a tragedy this time round rather than a horror film.
I was going to ask you, I think it's so, I had a very similar experience. So I watched it at LFF when it screened there, and I'm a very big fan of Paco Plaza in general, so we'll talk about him in a minute, but I always want to see whatever it is that he's doing next. So I was excited about this, and it was really scary. But when I rewatched it today for the purposes of this, I was like, this is really sad. Yeah. I didn't remember just how many scenes of Veronica being by herself and being the mom essentially for her baby siblings. and her dealing with her mother, with her school, with the demon, with her siblings. Like everything was on her. And there was so little space and time for her. And the only moments is when, like you mentioned, she's alone kind of in her bed at night, looking up at the ceiling. And there's something really tragic about a teenager or a kid kind of not being able to sleep. It seems a little bit, perhaps pretentious, but a children's bed or their bedroom, especially teenage girls, right? It's like their world. And she feels so isolated and completely unprotected in her own house, especially when like this demon stuff starts happening, that I'm like, wow, that is just completely devastating, that this girl is constantly on for everyone else and has not a single space, not even her bed, not even her room, where she feels like she's protected and safe.
Yeah, that's such a good observation. And it does sort of, because she is a child and an adult. That's the weird thing. I think she's 15. And there's this whole thing made out about her is that she hasn't had her period yet. That's like a thing that is one of the questions I think the nuns ask her. So yeah, and she has these sort of like childish like glow in the dark stars on her ceiling that she just stares at while she goes to sleep, doesn't she? Like listening, like she protects her world by listening in on headphones all the time, isn't she? That's when the only time she has for herself. And as you say, like it did just feel so tragic. I mean, I would have loved to watch this in the cinema, like you, LFF. That must have been great.
It was great. It was really good. And I kind of, while we're talking about this sort of tragedy of Veronica as well, what do you think of her as a character? Yeah, like how she's presented to us and kind of how I'd like, in a way, it's also kind of in the title. The film is all about her. It starts and it finishes when her story finishes. And if you sort of take away the based on real events thing, it is kind of like a tragic character story, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is kind of an interesting one, because you're kind of, I thought, quite artfully given the small amount of exposition you need without it being shoved down your throat to like get a sense of like who she was before this film started. I was never quite sure like how her dad died or how long ago he died or anything like that. But what my impression of Veronica is that, she, even though she is obviously quite resentful of her mother, because they have that wonderful conversation about halfway through the film where she tells her mother she's tired of being alone and having to take care of the kids all the time, like her siblings. But she's so like she just does it. She just cracks on. She's always, she puts them to bed, she makes them dinner. She's just essentially their mum at such a young age, and you can just see her just like desperately, like trying to also live a teenage life. Like when her friends, had that party, and she's, but she's, I think, this is the thing in this movie. Like usually, like there's a reason a character deserves to be punished or by a demon or anything like that. But because it's a possession film, it does beg the question, like, why did it target her, and what is it about her that kind of let the demon in? And I did wonder. I mean, there is a way to read this if you forgetting the fact that it's based on a true story where like an officer saw paranormal activity. There isn't. You could take this film and reading it like she's actually developing some kind of epilepsy or some kind of neurological issue, and none of this is actually real, based on the pressure that she has found herself in this really tragic situation of having to like look after, be mum too young. And I guess we'll get into the ending and like why she eventually succumbs to the demon and what that says about her. But yeah, I just thought generally, to cut a long story short, she's just a very sympathetic character.
There's something really interesting that you bring up, like why did it target her, right? And there's so many. This is also the thing that I got from the rewatch, right? It's like, oh, there's so many ways to read this film outside of just a simple, straightforward, like Exorcist light type possession story, because she does sort of invite the demon in through the Ouija board, but it's also whether you choose to read it as supernatural or just like a break of some kind. Everything that we just talked about, how sad and alone and isolated Veronica is, kind of leaves her very vulnerable to both any sort of, emotional breakdown, or if you see it as just purely on the nose supernatural, like a possession, because she's just much more vulnerable than her friends and because she has no recourse. And I do love the ending. I want to talk about the ending because you could argue, like, did she invite the demon in, or did she like allow him in because she needs, it's a way of also like having some attention for herself.
Ooh, that's an interesting thought.
Because everybody relies on her, but nobody's actually helping her. So if she's now put in this position where she's the victim of the demon, then somebody has to, like, she now needs to be forced to ask for help, and still people don't help her.
Well, that's the thing, because she kind of hides it from her mum for quite a while. So like I see what you're saying there. So there was an element where I think if she'd acted in a different way, there could be a interpretation that like, oh, is this for attention, because she's just, no one is giving her any support or attention. But that wasn't my reading on it, like especially because it was more, she, obviously everything is broken in her life because of her dad's absence, and the reason she does the Ouija board is to speak to him, and that was one of the horrible things. That's one of the first demon reveals, isn't it? It comes to her in her dream in the shape of her father, like naked in her room, which is like one of the other spacebar press pause moments I had when I first watched this. I think it was a kind of longing. I really do. I think I took it quite literally. It came from a longing to have a connection of when times were happier and easier for her, and why her? I think she is, as you said, she's definitely vulnerable. I wonder if she's probably a little bit more emotionally immature compared to her friends as well, or for a 15-year-old. Like, yes, she has all the responsibility, but there's a childishness to her, and maybe that's, obviously emphasized because she hasn't had her period yet. Where, demons, they prey on that kind of girls going through that period of their lives, literally, don't they? As a trope.
Yeah, and also it's really interesting because, like, as mature as she is, taking care of so much of the house and her siblings and her mom, she doesn't actually know how to be a teenager. Yeah,
the teenage stuff, she behaves like that party. It's just like you're like a hysterical little girl, almost, rather than like, knowing how to be around guys, or be in that kind of scene. And interesting, talking about guys for a second. Sorry to have a transgression.
No, go for it.
Transgression. There are no men in this film.
You're very right. Oh my God, I hadn't thought about it. There are no men in this film aside from the demon.
From the demon and the police officer who
at the end
wraps everything up. It's this kind of neat bow.
Well, and the little brother, Antonito.
That's true. That we have little Antonito. But there's no male figures of that she can turn to. Like, and it's the women. So by default, it's the women in her life who let her down over and over and over again.
Oh my God, you're very right. And it's also, I think the other thing that, having now watched what feels like hundreds teen horror films in quick succession, there is this thing that has always appeared in these movies, is that the adults are never there, or the adults are always disappointing, or the adults are just not someone you can ask for help. And the same thing happens here, right? Even in her school with the nuns, she does ask the creepy nuns for help. But they're so framed almost like, especially the blind nun, so framed almost like a supernatural being herself, or like a medium type figure. But the adults in Veronica's life are nowhere to be found, and not dependable at all. There's no like institution, like the police, her school, her family that will help her.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you sort of brought this up earlier, but there was that about like, I can't remember how you phrased it, but there was a line that she says to her mum that really kind of summed that up for me. I think she doesn't she accuse her mum at one point of saying like, it doesn't come when you're home?
Yes.
Like she begs her mum to like in the sort of childish way that we've been talking about, like she's just desperate for a parental figure that never materializes. I read I can't remember what review it was. It might have been the NME article about this film, but it describes her mum in this. It was such a good phrase. It was like benign neglect.
Oh my god!
As a parent, I was like, that's great. I'm going to steal that for something. But yeah, it really does feel like just like I'm just a kid, just desperate for a parent to come and like turn on the lights and make everything okay, and they don't come.
Like her mom is not. That's a very good turn of phrase, because her mom is not bad. She's not evil or abusive in any kind. She's just not
with
there
grief herself.
Yeah, and she's just working all the time. But I did want to ask as well, and you kind of brought them up a little bit. What do you make of the other teenagers?
Oh yeah, what are their names? Rosa and someone.
I'm gonna double check. It's like, is it Rosa and Diana?
Diana, maybe? That's the one. Yeah. What do I think about her friends? Yeah, so she doesn't have many friends. It seems like it feels like Rosa, her best friend, is literally the only person in her life, seemingly, and but Rosa seems to be growing up and pulling away. Was my interpretation from her, which is why I think she's more interested in hanging out with her new friend, popular, dangerous friend Diana, which is, that was kind of my interpretation. I mean, she just let her down, like, and I like, especially when we get that reveal at the party later on, like the sort of, in the structure of the film, the sort of all is lost moment where she goes desperate for help, like we need to close the seance that, creepy nuns told me we need to fix what we broke. We need to put everything right. And she's in this kind of hysterical, childish state at this party where everyone's, cool. And, Diana is making out with some bloke and she literally like wrenches her off her, doesn't she? But then we have that horrible, sad reveal where like her friend Rosa says like the reason, when Veronica has that seance and she goes catatonic on the floor and she whispers something we don't hear originally, and Rosa reveals to us that she said, "Oh, you told me that you were going to die today." Like, and I don't know if there was one argument where like, sure, like Rosa's also a teenager and she's scared and she's probably just withdrawing because she's frightened. But then there's, on the other hand, that I kind of saw this as, it's like, you're just like the shittest friend in the world. Like your friends, you haven't done anything to support your friend. You've literally just isolated her after she's said she's going to die, or like,
Yeah, that she was going to die in 5 days.
Yeah, so it's like, I'll cut you out then. Like, it's really horrible.
And like, we sort of circled around this earlier, but I do wonder, like, how do you think this sits between a possession film and a teen film?
Yes, so for me, this is more of a possession film than a the classic teen slasher trope or anything like that. I really did see this as more quite an internal, in terms of its tone and genre. Like I viewed this as, it's like a supernatural possession story with the tropes of young teenage female being vulnerable and possessed by a dark demonic force that seeks to, you know, whatever the demon wants from her, whether it's to just steal her soul or just, you know, make her life a living hell, is definitely saw it more in the sort of possession spectrum.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so we've talked sort of round about the demon and the possession and stuff like that, but what do you think of the actual like possession and the demon of it all? Because he weirdly, first of all, materializes like with the almost human figure, and like very visible, but then also the actual acts of possession feel quite different from what I at least expect from possession films in a way.
Why don't you tell me more about that? What do you mean by that?
Well, like, obviously the granddaddy of possession films is obviously The Exorcist, but there is something like really bodily that I expect. Like, I expect the demon to actually be inside the body and kind of this, usually it's women or especially girls who, you know, they're throwing, someone else really wants to fix them instead of their bodies just being kind of ripped apart from the inside out, and they're thrashing around, their face changes, their appearance changes, they become sort of super strong, creepy, but everything is really confined to one space, right? They're kind of immobilized by the possession. Whereas here, Veronica, she does get physically attacked by the demon, but she's literally still doing her to-do list. She's literally still taking care of everyone and also trying to figure out her own possession. And the demon is attacking her baby sister and brother, right? So she's also trying to protect them while it's all happening. And she sees it physically in the corridor and in her house. So I did find it really interesting because she was still like up and around and not being, you know, confined in her body, controlled in her body by this demon. If that makes sense?
Yeah, and I guess that's sort of a reveal towards the end, because maybe unlike, and I forget, you know, it's been a long time since I've seen a movie like The Exorcism of Emily Rose or anything like that. But at least comparing it to a film like The Exorcist, we're not really in the point of view of that little girl. We're more in the point of view from the men, the priests trying to fix her. Whereas in this, it's all from her point of view and her as an unreliable protagonist's point of view, I suppose. You know, we keep having this thing where like she is, we're with her when we're experiencing her nightmares, when we're experiencing, you know, her seeing the sinister shadow go across the wall, when she sees the demon strangling her little sister. That's all from her point of view, not from her siblings. And then they literally contradict everything that she's seen. Like the kids, which is quite interesting. You know, kids in terms of tropes, they're used to be able to, we're familiar with them being able to see demons, but even the children can't see the demons. I don't think they ever do see the demon, or at least it's not confirmed. It's all her until, you know, right at the end where like the police officer walks in and sees her, you know, floating in the air. But yeah, up until that moment, it's like, it's very questionable whether, you know, is it ever really there? Because so the reveal I was getting at was that, she has this big thing that, oh, it's not the demon, it's me who's been doing this the whole time. So that was kind of, you know, because she sees herself in the mirror and it's not actually her reflection. And then she thinks back to like when she was strangling her sibling, it was actually her who was doing, you know, all these little things. So it's just about a matter of perspective. And like, you know, if it was, you know, and that's the kind of question mark, I guess.
Does it work for you? Like, does it change the film on rewatch, thinking about it as her being possessed but actually like feeling like she's not, like not noticing that she's possessed?
Well, that's a really good question. And maybe that's perhaps why I found the film less frightening a second time round, because even though it's not, but we know that maybe it's her doing it rather than a demon. Although, I don't know, I think the film does come down pretty strong that it is like a demon that ultimately kills her. Like, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it does. I think it does lessen the scares a bit when you know that's what's happening. It is really interesting. This is like, she's just not in control of even her reality, even to the extent where like she can't trust her own senses. Like, we already knew she wasn't in control and she was trapped by her personal situation, and now it's even more heightened. I don't know, what was your take on it all?
Well, I to be honest, I'd completely forgotten about the sort of the twist of it, so it was kind of interesting thinking about it again, kind of in hindsight, being like, oh wait, no, it is potentially her. But that just kind of the earlier question and the kind of the how this is a possession film and a teen horror film makes it a lot more interesting, because she's possessed throughout the entire film and we simply do not know that, or we don't know that until the ending. And it kind of makes it sadder, because it is sort of that benign neglect is manifesting itself in her actually harming the people that she cares about the most.
Yeah, because there was this there's that, I feel like this, I mean, it's never like explicitly said, but I guess you could argue the transgression. There's always like a literal transgression that lets the demon in. Like, sure, shouldn't have done a Ouija board. You didn't follow the rules on the Ouija board. You didn't say goodbye, etc. But then, like, there's also tends to be, if it's a good film, at least, there'll always be a sort of metaphorical or subtextual reason. And for me, I mean, in this story, it's because, in her dreams where she imagines her siblings feasting on her flesh, and then we keep having these little moments where, like, when she leaves her brother in the bath with the hot water faucet like running on high, or did she, and then like right at the end when she goes back to rescue her little brother, she's kind of clutching that shard of glass, and there was a part of me who's like, is that for the demon, or is that for, like, is she going to, like, I don't know, hurt her brother? I was worried. I was worried for her brother's safety from her more than from the demon at that point.
I think that's the interesting gray line that it's tiptoeing around, because at this point, like, you don't know whether she's the source of the danger for the kids, or whether she's also one of the victims of the demon. And I think it's kind of both.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you kind of, what do you think of the ending and the ambiguity of it all? Like, is she making this, is she sacrificing herself to protect her family, or is she just being killed by the demon?
The ending confused me. Because I felt like I had a handle on what this was about. But then, reading the events is what happened, literally. So she sees herself in the mirror. She realizes, it's me, I'm the demon. She gets this shard of glass and she tries to cut her throat. And it was a bit ambiguous what actually happened, but I've like had to, I read online like what actually, apparently she tries to cut her throat, but the demon stops her. But then in the next moment, the demon puts its sort of like shadowy hand down her throat.
Yes. Ew.
And I was like, so what is that? So is it like, that's a proper possession like moment, but what is it actually trying to do there? Is it trying to possess her, even though I think it already has? Or is it trying to kill her? Is it trying to steal her? I wasn't sure what the demon was trying to do, especially because she then dies a little, like 10 minutes later when she's in the ambulance. So it's like, why did you try to stop her from slitting her throat if you were going to kill her? I was just a bit, maybe I've misinterpreted something, but I found, and maybe it's because demons ain't got no agenda, they're just dickheads, I don't know. But I felt that was something about that series of events confused me a little bit. Did you have a different take on it?
Well, I kind of thought that the demon was trying to kill her, but perhaps there's an additional like demonic layer to it. Like, it was trying to kill her, but also to take her soul, something like that. So it had to do that instead of just letting her commit suicide. And ultimately she dies sort of not by, I guess, out of just exhaustion. So not by her hand, not really by the demon's hand. But I also quite like the interpretation that she is sacrificing herself, but that she kind of needs to sacrifice herself to the demon. She cannot just die. She needs to die by the demon's hand. And the mythology is never explained in this. And I quite like that. I don't need an over-explanation of the mythology or the rules of this particular demon. Yeah. Emotionally, it feels to me like a sacrifice. And within the character of Verónica, I think the theory or the reading of she's sacrificing herself, she's essentially choosing to die to protect her siblings and her family, is the one.
But even then, she's not allowed to do it. Like, she's not allowed to. Oh gosh, that interpretation makes it even more tragic. Cause it's
right?
Yeah, she might have wanted to, like, I'm going to do the good thing and sacrifice myself in the ultimate way to protect everybody. But then the demon is like, nope, you're going to still die, but not under your own, not in the way that you would want. It's very horrible. Like, she still has no control over anything in her life or her death at this moment.
Not even her death.
Yeah. It's very sad. See, this is why it's a tragedy.
It really, really is. And I do love a bit of tragic horror, to be honest. I'd never thought of Verónica as a tragic horror.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is the thing. I always do this bullshitty thing. Like, paranormal activity, the real demon is toxic masculinity, or I don't know, it's like, no, it's actually a demon. But with this, like, it really does feel like, gosh, the real what really killed her is I think a fair and legitimate question. Like, is it her having like some kind of nervous breakdown because no one will look after her? Is it because she's developed some kind of neurological stress disorder, or is it because it's a demon? I think
or is it neglect? Is it just being neglected?
Yeah. I mean, like, even their house is sort of, I don't know if it was mold or burn marks on those mattresses, but it just felt like everything was just disintegrating.
Yeah, I read it as burn marks, but sort of the really gross, like, these are sort of like almost like wounds in a way.
Yeah, they did, but like, I think I got it in my head that it was mold because the downstairs neighbor said that there was like a mold stain, I think, on the ceiling. So that's why I was like, is it like coming through from the mattress or something? Okay,
so let me ask you this, because the other interesting thing, well, it's not that interesting. I think it's interesting to me, because it's a Spanish film and it's set in Madrid. How did that fact that it's sort of like an international horror that plays around with these sort of tropes of teen and possession horror, how does that work for the atmosphere of Verónica for you? Because these like houses and stuff and look very and feel very different from what we're used to seeing in these types of films.
That's a really interesting question. I think generally, like, horror films that are subtitled frighten me more than, English-speaking films. And I don't know whether that's just an extra layer of uncanny or something strange, like subliminally, is going on. I mean, I really did want to ask you, because you obviously speak Spanish. So, like, what was, how did you interpret this? But I think the only thing that really stood out to me as unusual was the geography of the flat. When she can look out the window and see across from her, like, the bedroom with the kids in it, and that was like, hang on a second, like, what? Like, how big is this flat? Like, why? Is this just a normal thing in Spain? That threw me.
That's a really Madrid thing. Yeah. So I grew up in Barcelona, but I lived in Madrid for years. And what's really interesting, I'm going to bring in like Paco Plaza's next film, The Grandmother, La Abuela, which also played LFF last year. And it also is very much set in one old apartment.
Right.
And like, I noticed it, maybe because I haven't been to Spain in a while, but they feel just so much more claustrophobic to me, maybe because I've been in a lot of those places. So I've lived in those flats, like the big, very heavy doors, the weird geography, and the fact that you can sort of see the inside of your own flat. It's because of the way that those some of those buildings are structured. They've got like a big, very slim interior patio in the inside, which just means that all the flats can sometimes like see each other. So you sometimes don't have like windows that look up onto the street. They have windows that only look into the interior patio, so they don't get a lot of light, and you can basically like see either your neighbors or your own windows, depending on how big the flat is, from different windows.
Okay. All right.
Which is really recognizable to me, but like really strange for someone who's not been inside those spaces.
Yeah, there was like a moment because they take quite a while establishing that she can see her neighbors. And then, so I was really confused at that moment. I was like, well, hang on, is that happening in her neighbor's flat? Like when she sees the red light going off? I can imagine that must be quite, the architecture of that flat, being able to like literally look in on yourself, definitely adds this sort of uncanny for me as someone who's not familiar with that at all.
Yeah, that really, and the fact that they're also like so busy, like the furniture is really heavy, really bulky. There's so much stuff around, you know, all of these like pictures, like these crosses on the walls and stuff. That's not unusual, in kind of, you know, traditional Spanish houses and stuff. So, but it just adds to this element of like, oh, it's really stuffy. It's so claustrophobic in that sense. And I mean, maybe it's like part, memory related or nostalgia related, but they really work for me because I always felt creeped out by those old Madrid apartments.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can imagine why that would definitely happen. I think I just took it as like, oh gosh, she's living in chaos, and no one's really there to kind of sort out the chaos. But I didn't realize that was as normal, rather than just her life.
And well, I sent you this article as well, and I kind of don't remember this at all, but I remember when I was looking into it again, this film got super well received. It was like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. The NME called it the scariest film ever, which I think your own film host topped a few years later.
Hey, I'll take it.
But do you think it is scary? Like, even as we've chatted for almost an hour, do you think the scary outweighs the tragic with Veronica?
I think if I'd only watched it once, I would have definitely said like, no, this film, there's so many moments in it that just made my skin crawl. You know, there's especially like
which ones?
Well, like the famous one where I've already mentioned the one where she's in bed and then like the cupboard creaks open, and we've all been there as a kid. It's a very relatable sort of like, oh god, there's something in my room and I don't know what it is, and having the sort of figure in the corner of the room that is just watching you, that kind of real horror. And then, you know, they're just those kind of classic tropes I guess we've seen in other things, with like the reflection that she can't see of the demon in the dark TV screen. And right at the end, you know, I think every time, I mean, it did become less and less scary the more we saw the demon, like, but there was that horrible moment at the end where he's just like walking behind her along the corridor that was just like, nope, don't, you know, it's definitely scary, but like for me, this film does become more of a tragedy on a second watch than quite as effective a horror film.
And before we wrap up, Gemma, we sort of, again, kind of briefly circled around this, and maybe it's not as relevant for non-Spanish audiences, but the whole based on real events thing, which we see through the title cards, the end cards, and then with the policemen who just appear and watch Veronica die, basically. They're very useful.
They just come to watch.
Yeah. Do you think it adds to the film, or do you think it takes away from it?
The fact that it's based on a real story. That was, for me, the thing that made, you know, that's a good point. I think that was one of the things that made this film really frightening for me when I first saw it, especially the fact that this, not in a fake way, in the way that Blair Witch claims to be based on a real story, or Cloverfield or, whatever. This is actually genuinely based on a real story. So everything you're watching, even though, you imagine that there's lots of artistic license being taken, and that really unnerved me because it was like, well, could this be true? And it's always that kind of like that sort of niggling question in the back of your mind, even though as an adult you're like, no, of course not. This is, I found that really effective. Was this a story that you were familiar about before? Because I'd never heard of this story.
It's one of those where I've probably heard it, but it didn't spring to mind. Like I couldn't put two and two together. So like it's loosely based on the case of Estefanía Gutiérrez Lázaro, who was like 1991, set in Vallecas, which is like a working class suburb of Madrid. And it's like very famous because of like they mention in the end credits, there was so many eyewitnesses to it. And it was put, the details of sort of Estefania's death were put in an official police report, and it was sort of had this great official categorization called situation of mystery, which I kind of really love. It's like, I mean, the Spanish formalities are, when they're translated, are just chef's kiss. But I wasn't super aware of this case in particular. I'm aware of some like really gruesome true crime cases in Spanish history, but they're mostly like contained to Spanish film adaptations, if anything. And they're usually like, then very controversial because people don't want to remember or don't want to think about the fact that their own country has really dodgy history or really dodgy murders or true crime situations. We tend to just be like, no, that's an American thing. That's, that's in America and we see the movies and then it never happens nearby. To be honest, it didn't really do anything for me. I think that's more perhaps for a local audience that might do something for them, or just there is an added bonus that always comes with, it's based on real events. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Am I going to have to fact check this? Because I really don't want homework. But I also know that Paco Plaza like was very loose. He was like, it's just the premise. I don't think it has necessarily too much intention of being a strict adaptation of what could possibly have happened to Estefania. It's more like, this is a really cool premise for a horror movie. Let's expand on this and fill it in and build a character out of this. Essentially the ending. So they know the ending and then it kind of worked backwards from there. And that works. It works for me as a piece of fiction that I think kind of owes a debt to a real case.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. So like the whole being based on a true story didn't necessarily make you feel more frightened.
Not really, because of all of that. Like I take it always with such a grain of salt. Like unless you are the filmmakers are actively trying to be rigorous with the truth, it just does. It's just a premise. All I think about is like, you took a good idea and you expanded on it, you build something out of it, and that's it. You don't owe me facts, you owe me a story.
Fair enough. I think I used, in my time, I've been, I like to think of myself as a skeptic. And I think that was the thing that made it more compelling, was the fact that it was in the police report. And I don't know how often that happens. But I found that evidence very convincing. So I think that's probably why it got under my skin more than something like, I don't know, what's a relatable film? Like maybe the Amityville Horror.
Oh, yeah. But also, that's so interesting, right? Because the whole Amityville thing was a hoax.
Yeah. Was it? Okay, now I'm being silly.
No, it is. Oh, I'll send you some links, Gemma.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a big hoax. None of that was real. Oh, no. Oh, gosh.
But the movies are kind of great, aren't they?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I was like, oh, this is real. But that's the thing. It's like, because it's America, I took it with a pinch of salt, but maybe I gave it more respect because it was Spanish. I was like, well, they wouldn't lie. I don't know what that means.
The Spanish would not lie.
What is this racial stereotype?
That's so funny.
Oh my god, it's all coming out now.
This. It's like because it's a European film, it has
it's got more credibility.
Yeah, it's more credible. It's got more gravitas. Even with possessions, even the possessions are grittier when it's a European horror film.
Oh my gosh, there we go. That's where it's come from. We've got to the subconscious truth there.
Oh my god. Oh. That just killed me.
I've been giggling now.
But Gemma, before we wrap up on Veronica, is there anything that you wanted to mention about the film that we haven't covered or discussed?
Oh gosh, I think about the film, I think we've really covered it all. The one thing I was going to say was, even though I said that this movie didn't scare me on the second watching, I, coincidentally or not, decided halfway through rewatching this film to turn my whole desk sideways so that the back of the room with the door wasn't behind me anymore. Oh my god! I'm literally just sitting in this like sideways room with like the desk in the middle of the room because I was like, oh, I can't handle the idea that there could be a ghost behind me.
J'accuse, Gemma.
Pathetic.
It wasn't scary on second watch, was it? Yeah. It's all coming out.
Well, I think we can ascertain if we're going to do some stereotypes. The English are liars. Apparently, that's what we've discovered here.
Oh my god, I love it! On the day after the Queen's birthday, Gemma.
Liars, all of them. I'm not scared.
Oh my god, what I think this is a great way to end what is actually a really sad teen possession movie. On shame and lies, Gemma Hurley.
Nice. It's Gemma Hurley with Shame and Lies. There we go. Well, you're welcome.
Gemma, thank you so much for your time and for your insight and your lies. Anytime, Anna. So, for people who aren't following you already, where can they find more of your work online?
You can find me on social media at Gem Hurley. That's probably a good place to start.
Amazing. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Anna.
Oh my god. Oh. That just killed me.
I've been giggling now.
But Gemma, before we wrap up on Veronica, is there anything that you wanted to mention about the film that we haven't covered or discussed?
Oh gosh. I think about the film, I think we've really covered it all. The one thing I was going to say was, even though I said that this movie didn't scare me on the second watching, I, coincidentally or not, decided halfway through rewatching this film to turn my whole desk sideways so that the back of the room with the door wasn't behind me anymore. Oh my god! I'm literally just sitting in this like sideways room with like the desk in the middle of the room because I was like, oh, I can't handle the idea that there could be a ghost behind me.
J'accuse, Gemma.
Pathetic.
It wasn't scary on second watch, was it? Yeah. It's all coming out.
Well, I think we can ascertain if we're going to do some stereotypes. The English are liars. Apparently, that's what we've discovered here.
Oh my god, I love it! On the day after the Queen's birthday, Gemma.
Liars, all of them. I'm not scared.
Oh my god, what I think this is a great way to end what is actually a really sad teen possession movie. On shame and lies, Gemma Hurley.
Nice. It's Gemma Hurley with Shame and Lies. There we go. Well, you're welcome.
Gemma, thank you so much for your time and for your insight and your lies.
Anytime, Anna.
So, for people who aren't following you already, where can they find more of your work online?
You can find me on social media at Gem Hurley. That's probably a good place to start.
Amazing. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Anna.